Hello everyone and welcome back. Today is the day, the last remaining embargo for Tides of Torment, the review. And we're going to be talking about a bunch of stuff. This is going to be a fairly long video, so once again, get some snacks, get some drinks. We're going to talk about literally everything from the content to the adjoining patch to the year that led up to this. If you're looking for anything in specific, the timestamps can be found in the description below where there'll be chapters, ratings, and all the usual stuff. So yeah, let's just jump right in, shall we? So first up, I spent a fair amount of time on this build. I had 397 hours before I started playing around with the Tides of Torment builds, the various ones, as we did have some updates between this cycle, and now I have 4,148 hours. This means that at the time of recording this video, I'm on around 170 plus hours on the build. Why is this important? It's just to let you know that yes, time has been put on there, not just on streaming and videos, but also playing around with the build to try and find as much as possible. I don't believe I covered everything I would have liked to, as you guys are aware. I normally do a lot more videos, but I'm in the middle of a move. But unlike other people, I am not comfortable with doing a review for a DLC for this franchise, at the very least, without spending at least 100 hours. That time has been done, so let's talk about the content. Now, Tides of Torment is a free pack DLC bundle. This is a 1v1v1, smaller DLCs bundled together. If you buy them together, you'll be able to get a discount. It's basically just splitting up the DLCs after the trouble that happened with Shadows of Change. Ultimately, this format has been better so far because, one, it means that you can buy the content that is specific to yourself if you don't want the full pack, and two, you may only purchase this after it's been released. There are no pre-orders, which means that you can't fall for any pre-order deception, whether it be officially from the official sources or from non-official sources but slightly still attached. No good boy links to buy this DLC, as it has happened in the past where people will completely throw those good boy links out there to get a commission and then absolutely flail the DLC or title upon its review embargo. This goes for legacy media also. Now, this is a content pack that many people have been waiting for quite some time. Following the same format, it's a Chaos faction, this time being SLAANESH, an Order faction, this time being the High Elves, and then for the third faction, it's been another Chaos one with NORSCA, with the fabled NORSCA rework being attached to it. Please keep in mind, as always, the NORSCA rework, the MASQUE as a legendary lord for SLAANESH, and a few other content bits. Those are completely for free, yet will still fall in line with the development cycle of the DLC and will receive comments throughout this video. So first, let's talk about the DLC content. We're going to start off with NORSCA. So for NORSCA, we have SAYL the Faithless, a character that was introduced with the Throne of Chaos book, so at the same time as Tamukan, and has been a long time coming for some time now. I do have to point out that he is in fact not a Norscan, but rather a Kurgan. I'm not sure why this distinction hasn't been made. I know, it's just very small things, but it's two completely separate cultures of people. You don't call a Swede a Mongolian or a Mongolian a Swede, and this is basically what's happened here. Now, SAYL's found himself in a brand new portion of the map, alongside getting all the benefits that NORSCA has gotten in its free update in 7.0, launching at the same time as the DLC. The character is going to be fairly unique when compared to the other two legendary lords, focusing around manipulations, a lot of spellcasting. This is your spellcaster lord that is going to go against the Chaos Gods, despite being a member of a faction that, well, mostly worships the Chaos Gods. Where in most cases, the other Norscan lords can dedicate to a specific god or even get god-touched units, SAYL can only focus around Chaos Undivided, and even then, it's more on a renegade style. That fits incredibly well, as, well, he is the Faithless, so that's what he's all about. The manipulations, on the other hand, this is where things get really curious, because you'll be focusing around really just actively playing the battlefield. I've seen a lot of people compare it to the Changing of the Ways that Tzeentch has, and yes, in truth, it is very similar, but it's more of a mixture of not only the Changing of the Ways, but also the mechanics that you get with Deathmaster Snickage. it ends up playing to a very unique campaign, allowing you to even make factions declare wars on every factions that they know. You can steal supplies, you can even boost up your own faction, but the manipulations do come at a cost. You see, the more that you do them, the more that you attract the attention of the Chaos Gods, which then they'll start to send forces to deal with you, whether that be smaller forces of marauders and warriors, larger ones, which can get kind of deadly, mixed up with some Chaos Demons, or just full-on Doom stacks. At one point, I did have to deal with a Doom stack, which was 10 Great Unclean Ones, including its Lord, and 10 Plague Hulks of Nurgle. Thankfully, I had a decent army there, or else I wouldn't have survived that. There is a risk there, so you'll have to wait a little bit for cooldown, unless you feel confident enough to deal with those forces. It's actually pretty interesting. And I like that. The risk and reward factor is really good to see in a Total War game, especially for Warhammer, and it fits with his character incredibly well. This DLC also includes a host of new units, where you'll not only get Bjorg Bearstrock, a rather famous character from back in the day. Well, he was more of a part of a regiment of renown for the Dogs of War, but you'll get the Marauder Bearmen represented as units, Kurgan Horsemen represented finally for the first time in a long time, the Etin, a model from the Forge World era, which, to be fair, one of the best from that era. The Chimera, a creature that we know has been in the back of Creative Assembly's vault for a long time, seeing as it was in the art book before the release of Warhammer 3. The Dreadmaw, a creature from the Forge World era once again in the Monstrous Arcanum, finally makes its appearance in the form of a Norscan monster. And lastly, we have a brand new generic Lord, the Great Sorcerer Shaman. This has access to the same laws that the normal Sorcerer Shamans can have, and a Famir Noble, allowing you to have yet another Famir generic character, which is always good to see. The Famir have been largely ignored for quite some time. Now, the first thing that you're going to see from this list is, well, it's kind of disjointed, isn't it? And I would agree, but all of these are kind of linked up. The Bearmen are obviously Norscans, the Ettins are a former Norscan tribe, Chimeras can be found pretty much anywhere around the Chaos, well, tainted lands, and there's quite a lot in the Warhammer Fantasy universe. Kurgans, well, they're only introduced because Kurgans are attached to SAYL, as he is a Kurgan himself, and I do appreciate that. The Dreadmaw seems a bit weird, considering that lore inconsistencies for the Dreadmaw, even recent stuff, has been kind of throwing it all over the place, including the vampire counts trying to summon one at some point in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and we do know that all these settings are very much attached. I think the additions overall have been kind of fine, and they have performed as well as they've needed to, especially since the Legendary Hero boosts up the Bearman. It's also nice just to have a generic stop waypoint, so it's not just Marauders going straight into Champions. The Kurgans have been very, very useful. The only thing I would say is it's pretty disappointing that the Kurgans don't have a Bowman variant. You see, this would have been the perfect time to introduce some bows, at the very least one unit for NORSCA, as Kurgans do use bows, it is fairly well known. And it would have been good to have some very decent skirmish cavalry. The Marauder Horsemasters are alright, but it kind of fits off the theme, especially when SAYL has faction effects to make the Kurgan Horsemen a little bit better. Holes aside, I very much doubt that we're going to be getting a full Kurgan faction at any point, because there's not really much that can be done there, so at least we got some representation of them in-game. So after playing around with SAYL and the Norscan units in not only SAYL's faction, but alongside Wulfric and Frog, can I recommend this DLC to you? Keep note here that I'm not going to be talking about how they benefit the Warriors of Chaos and the Beastmen until a bit later in the video. So, I would say that SAYL as a faction, very, very enjoyable. A little bit harder than Frog and Wulfric, but that's kind of expected considering on the location that he's based. I do feel like there were certain holes there that could have made the faction a little bit more enjoyable, like further expanding the map further north. There does seem to be some powers that be that does not want that to happen, whether that be from Creative Assembly or Games Workshop is yet to be fully realized just yet. There are of course assumptions, but we can't start villain batting people for the sake of villain batting people. The campaign is generally quite enjoying though. Going down into Cafe and fighting against a lot of factions gives you the variety. It also allows you to be able to pick up a lot of your special effects getting very quickly up there. The campaign itself is also centered around Cafe, which is good. It actually gives a little bit of a threat there that really has not been there for a while. For those who like to nitpick, I'm talking about chaos threats. I know Lokier and the Deathmaster are there, but there has not really been much of a chaos presence that lasts for a fair amount of time. Village dies relatively quickly, and Zatan normally gets stomped on by Kolek or Grimgor. Unit-wise, I can't seem to find many faults. The Ettins are pretty useful. The Chimera is incredibly powerful and does bring in a much requested unit for a certain amount of time now. The Surprise of the Kurgans and the Bearmen brings in quite a lot of flavor. It's certainly unit types that we've already seen before, but the most important thing is the variety. It's showing much more cultures throughout the Warhammer Fantasy world, something that we slowly get through DLCs, but it's a very slow grow. I will flat out say, however, were there not a NORSCA rework attached, which we'll go into detail later on, yeah, I would not recommend this DLC. No way in hell. The rework is what really sells the faction. That means that you don't really need to get SAYL right from the very beginning, that's for sure, but if you do pick him up, you will feel like it's a fun campaign, and it's not as soul-sucking as NORSCA was prior, given the fact that NORSCA as a faction was atrocious. And consistently atrocious. The new units will also fall in line with some being in the Warriors of Chaos and some being in the Beastmen, so you do get a little bit of extra bang for your buck. I am not going to give a rating to the individual Lord packs, instead I'm going to give a overall rating, as I still count these as a one DLC release. But SAYL is a short campaign for that, really, but very, very enjoyable. I had fun, not only recording the videos, but also doing a stream. Which if a campaign is fun to stream, it generally means that I've enjoyed it quite a lot. If not, I just close out the stream early and call it a day. Next, we're going to jump into DECHALA, the Denied One. This is the Legendary Lord for SLAANESH, the paid one, as there is a free one also. And she's a character that I was expecting for a long time. The moment that we started seeing monogod mortal factions, it was that or, well, there was no really other options. Now, I do have a bias towards SLAANESH, and expectations were probably higher for SLAANESH than there have been for any of the other factions introduced in this DLC. And I'm pretty surprised to say that Creative Assembly actually did deliver. I was expecting a Tamarkan level campaign, and what was I presented with? Well, more along the lines of the Chaos Dwarfs. She has so many mechanics, including 3 different types of settlements. You've got the Pleasure Palace system, the Thrall system. There is a lot. And yes, some stuff has been lifted from the Chaos Dwarfs, but I think that actually makes a lot of sense. What I've always been an advocate for is if you can reuse a mechanic but make it entirely unique, why not? And this is exactly what's been done. Some stuff has changed around. There's not the system of making multiple things to get to unlock units. Instead, you're using thralls for practically everything, but it's allowing you to then pick up Decadence, which then gives you faction-wide effects, which then gives you powerful items, which gets you into bigger battles, which will then give you more thralls, and so on and so forth. It's a cycle which I very much enjoyed, and it was pretty obvious when I titled this my favorite campaign on the thumbnail when I did my showcase for DECHALA, the Denied One. I was not expecting so much work being done on that character, and kudos to whoever must have come up with that campaign style. I could not have even come up with that myself. No matter how hard I tried to think about DECHALA, that was something incredibly surprising. To say this is obviously a big compliment. You know how critical I can be of Creative Assembly, and rightly so in certain circumstances, but I could not really find too many faults with DECHALA. Sure, the thrall system is very slow at the beginning, but it does actually build up longer and longer. And for those people who think, well, it sucks because you need vassals and the vassal system is pretty awful, which yes, I do agree with. You can essentially ignore the vassal system, getting just one if you want to just get a little bit of a trickle in, but as you go through your warfare, yeah, you're perfectly fine. Yeah, you'll be stuck with Marauders a little bit earlier, but her faction focuses around Marauders, so you don't have to feel that you need to go to Chosen right away. Now, SLAANESH had a very colourful roster in the form of units. Stirkar was the legendary hero, which was pretty expected. Nothing wrong about that, in all honesty, he's a great character. Devotees of SLAANESH were introduced as a bit of a surprise, also available to the Dark Elves. I don't like the fact that they don't have their coloring. It's something very strange. Creative Assembly have commented on that, and we will actually comment that a little bit later. But this gives you a crossbow unit, some range finally, and a additional hand weapon unit, which, I mean, you're going to be practically ignoring in most cases. The Pleasure Seekers are a unit that I've been waiting a long time for. It's not because of the fact that it's a big meme, but actually I really enjoy those models, and I've painted up a lot of them for the purpose of my old world armies, well, previously Warhammer Fantasy armies. It was imperative that the SLAANESH faction ended up getting some God-touched mounts in that regard, as, yeah, you know, everyone else is getting something, and it would have felt extremely badly if they got nothing, which is something that happens a lot in Warhammer through the Games Workshop point of view. It's a bit sad that we don't have the Mortal Knights, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, so let's continue with other units. Slangors were very much expected. I mean, additional hand weapons. A lot of people did want them with javelins, and it does seem like Creative Assembly, apparently, as per their Q&A, which is quietly missing at the time of recording this video, it's really odd. Yeah, they did flirt with it, but apparently just not going to happen. Alright, well, if the powers that be say no, that's perfectly fine. The additional hand weapons does actually make them quite aggressive, and coming from someone who used to field Warriors of Chaos in SLAANESH form for the tabletop, yeah, additional hand weapons were fairly decent. I see no fault in that. The Praeton still stands as something that I just don't see why it was introduced for SLAANESH, especially as there was mention of a giant Chaos Spawn in DECHALA's tech tree, and yet, yeah, it ended up being just a giant Chaos Spawn rather than a gigantic Chaos Spawn, which I think would have been much better here. Yes, some people might say classification because of Praetons having something near Athalora and blah 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 blah. Still, it's a Beastmen unit, not a SLAANESH unit. They were created by Bray Shamans, they were not created by SLAANESH. It feels very out of place, and I will continue to say it feels out of place. Now, when we go into the Lords and Heroes, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. Chaos Sorcerer Lord, very much expected, can turn into a Demon Prince, all the usual stuff, that's perfectly fine. The Druchii Anointed was a very big surprise because this was one of two generic heroes. So SLAANESH got less in terms of units, but actually got more in terms of heroes. Druchii Anointed being a minor spellcaster, very hard hitter, very good at character killing. All your characters can also ride upon a demonic steed, which is once again the fabled Boob Snake. Again, very happy about that because it's something that really is important to me. It's very good to see the mortals having that too. The last thing about the roster is clearly the Exalted Hero of SLAANESH, which, well, we were expecting, but obviously very different because it looks more like its original model from way back in the, well, one of the original models, because back then Games Workshop liked to create loads and loads of different character models. I've got that one myself, I'm really happy to see it, and I'm pretty happy. Now, I did miss out one unit, and I know some people are commenting, but that was on purpose. You see, the champions of SLAANESH aren't old, right? Every unit that we've seen introduced so far has existed in the tabletop or in the lore for quite some time now. The Champions of SLAANESH are completely new, which, by the way, with the Warriors of Chaos, you can update the Chosen of SLAANESH into Champions of SLAANESH, giving us the first of the God-touched aspiring champions. And I'm honestly incredibly impressed. Obviously, the model is based on that of Vandred the Majestic, and what they decided to do is, rather than bringing in Vandred as another legendary hero, which I kind of agree with, yeah, just make a new model, make a new unit. I don't know what work came into this. I don't know how much they had to plead with Games Workshop, but I am extremely grateful that that has happened. So would I recommend the SLAANESH DLC in Tides of Torment? And I would say yes. With all the time that I've spent here, I've been jumping in and out of SLAANESH a lot. The fact is, I was not expecting that campaign. I said it. It's Chaos Dwarf level campaignage, which is fantastic. That's what I want from Total War going forward, and it's been something that I've been advocating for a while. We need more campaigns like the Chaos Dwarves. Here I was saying more races, because more races could allow for more creativity, and then I'm absolutely slapped in the face and shown that it can be done with characters. If anything, Creative Assembly have shot themselves in the foot, because, yeah, the quality is there. We can expect that quality going forward, right? Right? A little bit of a fourth wall break there, but I think it's going to be kind of needed. That being said, yes, SLAANESH, fucking awesome, and I think that's probably the only way I can say it. Yes, there's a little bit of a bias there, but once you guys jump into the campaign, you'll see it too. DECHALA is incredibly structured. Again, with the units, there's always extra value there. Because you're not just getting those units for the SLAANESH, but you're getting those units for the Warriors of Chaos, for your Beastmen. Chaos DLC is very valuable. There is some clear issues with the devotees of SLAANESH. I think that they just didn't have time to finish it. I think they didn't have time. Because if you look at the Anointed of SLAANESH, the hero, yeah, the Anointed looks very, very unique. And there's a big question to be had there. Either they didn't have time, or something was crossed in terms of communication with the powers that be, which got that done. But the only real disappointing thing, and it is a really disappointing thing, is that the devotees are just recolors. It's not even a reskin, it's a recolor. Naturally, we know that Creative Assembly do want to change that up, and I'm kind of disappointed it took community backlash to get that acknowledged. I don't think that that should happen. Creative Assembly should be a little bit more proactive, and I'm fairly sure there's people at CA who look at those units and go, yeah, this is going to cause a bit of a problem. Whether they're listened to or not is beyond me, but we see these staff members up there in the interviews and stuff like that, those blogs. They are very passionate about this type of stuff. Fix that up and you'll get a lot more community favor, which leads us to our next point. As we're still not done with SLAANESH, yet I will recommend buying the DLC so far. Had the DECHALA campaign not been as good as it is, I probably wouldn't have recommended this DLC as of this moment. It is the saving grace here, and I think it's very important to say why. So, Warriors of Chaos and SLAANESH generally have God-touch mans, right? Well, the mono-gods. They're mortal riders. The Nurgle has Rot Knights, Skull Crushers for Khorne, Doom Knights for Tzeentch, nothing for SLAANESH. And that's something that we know now. There is a slight possibility that we'll get them down the line. This is something that was stated officially by developers and the influencer manager on one of their streams. My big question here is, why was this not in here originally? Sure, it might have been Games Workshop saying no, but did they fight hard enough for it? Considering that there is a very obvious hole there. Those Mortal Boob Snake Riders would have been a staple unit for SLAANESH. Sure, it didn't exist in the tabletop before, and they can't use that excuse because neither did Doom Knights. They never existed. Hell, there are a bunch of units in the game that never existed in Warhammer Fantasy or in Warhammer the Old World. Sure, the arguments could be, well, oh, there is a lore unit mentioned there and stuff like that, which, yes, I can understand. But there's a clear hole and parity must be done throughout the gods. I get that we get the aspiring champions first, but I wouldn't be surprised if we'll get aspiring champions for the other gods in the future. This is a very big thing, and the fact that they were very open about it, yeah, that's great. Communication is very important. They still didn't really provide a lot of information, and it's something that we may or may not get, which now the expectation, regardless of maybe means nothing now. The expectation is that it's going to happen. It's a very clear hole, and it sucks that this is not here. It really, really does suck. It's not a deal breaker for SLAANESH, but it's very close to it. The campaign, again, saved it. I don't know how Creative Assembly decides what units are going to end up in a DLC. What's the process? That's something that I, as a creator, will never be told, which kind of sucks. I would love to know the process about that. The problem there is this unit was a no-brainer. It should have been there. Right, before we jump onto the last faction, which is the High Elves, it's important to realize that NORSCA and the SLAANESH DLC, both of them are going to be a little bit more valuable than the High Elves, purely because those units go around. The devotees go to the Dark Elves, the Chaos Warrior stuff goes to the Chaos Warriors, right? A lot of stuff mixes around, certain monsters go into the Beastmen roster, a lot of them kind of intertwine. This is something that is obviously going to be a big push here, right? It's even better done now than it was for Omens of Destruction. And I think that's really important to talk about. The Champions of SLAANESH being upgradable, awesome, right? But the Warriors of Chaos getting the Bearmen, getting access to the Dreadmaw, getting access to the Chimera, that stuff is really, really good. And that means that if you don't really like NORSCA, but you can get a sweet deal on it, You could end up getting those because you like playing the Warriors of Chaos. If you play Beastmen, you'd need 2 of the DLCs, but if you're normally buying all one, you're generally buying all of them or just taking advantage of future discounts. I'm a bit sad that this method didn't extend to the High Elves, as the Merworm would have been lovely to have with the Vampire Coast, and it's something that I feel is a missed opportunity considering that the campaign for the Vampire Coast is centered around Merworms. Well, one specific, but DLC that specifically allows for a spread into other races and factions. And not only that, but it's handled better. Tamilkon, for example, the Rot Knights were upgradable. Omens of Destruction, you could use the new units, you know, the Wrathmongers and the Skull Reapers, but they were on that stupid RNG system, which is mostly how you're going to get like the Dreadmore and stuff, but you won't be doomstacking those. You will be doomstacking Champions of Slaanesh or Rot Knights. I don't imagine this will be the last time that we'll see this. I'm expecting certain units appearing in the future which will allow for that. Obviously, I don't want to discuss speculation, but it's something that needs to be taken into account constantly. Not only for this, but maybe even some future games, depending on the setting, of course, where appropriate. High Elves now, so we're going to be jumping in with Sea Lord AISLINN. Now, this was a character that a lot of people were expecting. Once again, Creative Assembly dipping back into 6th edition stuff, which I always will praise. 6th edition was the goat of the editions, and that's why the old world is based on 6th, right? So, Sea Lord AISLINN has a very fun campaign because you're not going to be empire building. Some people were put off about that when they found out, but I think it works incredibly well. Because the Sea Lord does not build empires. The Sea Lord goes out and defends the empires, defends the kingdoms of Ulthuan, the princedoms of Ulthuan, and also goes to re-establish colonies, build up outposts, and support the other big names. What it's really cool about that is that you're kind of building up a story. You're building up your dragon ships to deal with a threat. And we will talk about the narrative overall later on. But the idea here is you are expanding the borders of Ulthuan whilst also protecting it. You're going through what the Sea Patrol was established to do. While I do understand that a lot of people prefer to empire build in Total War, when it comes to a setting like Warhammer, there are cases where you won't be empire building. And I think that works out quite well when it's done appropriately so. And with AISLINN as the example, I think his campaign was done wonderfully, where I had so much fun dealing with the problems and supporting the High Elves. I was going down to deal with Kairos so I could save Teclis. I went up to Ulthuan to stop Count Noctilus, who for some reason is dealing with Ulthuan and taking it over without a problem. I kept feeding territories to Imrik in Grand Cafe so he could be closer to Miao Yin. The Confederation mechanic is there, but it actually isn't needed. I've never felt the reason to play Pokemon, even with this brand new mechanic, because I wanted to keep them alive. I wanted to see how well I could keep all the High Elves going. This was the first time since Warhammer 2 where I played a High Elf campaign and thought, damn, that was good. It was the complete opposite side of the spectrum when compared to the other High Elf factions, and I want more of that in the future for future DLCs. Okay, so we have to talk about the High Elf roster now, and there's a lot of interesting additions. The Sea Lord is probably the weakest here. It's a defensive lord with anti-large. It doesn't really have that much going for it, but it's very stylized, and it is one of the missing lord options for the High Elf, so it makes sense, especially since the whole roster added in through this DLC is well, it's the Sea Patrol. It's literally just the army list with a few additions from 6th edition. The Mist Mage is one of those mage characters that people will sleep on. You see, the Mist Mage has a brand new lore, and this is all focused around support spells, really. It's supports and debuffs, but there's not really that much that goes into it. It's not as powerful as any of the 8 color lores that you already have access to, but this means that you have a unique lore of magic, which is completely unique to the High Elves, and I think that's absolutely awesome. I used it throughout my campaigns. Sure, it's not as good as my favorite lore of metal, but hey, you know, it's nice to have the option, and I think that's really, really good. The legendary hero is Caradrian, and there's not really much to say about him. He's quiet, he does damage, and that's it, and he boosts up the Phoenix Guard. That's it, and you know what? That's perfectly fine. He does exactly what he's supposed to do, and that's amazing. But it's when we get into the units where things get very interesting. The least so is the ship's company. It's basically just sword and board high elves with a aquatic trait. I mean, yeah, I know. Not very impressive, but it's part of the roster, and I think it's good to finally actually have some very cheap sword and board units. The Merworm is another thing that people were expecting, especially as popular as it was on the tabletop, and it's back in the tabletop too. Single entity monster, extremely devastating, nothing to complain. The Lothan Skycutter, 2 of them, fairly decent, and they're also mount options, by the way, for your generic lords and heroes, and also the Sea Lord. The Bolt Thrower is objectively the better one, but the bow still has its uses if you want something cheaper. The bow isn't great, I'm not going to lie to you, right? But I'd rather have both options than only have one. It's very important just to get all the variants in there, because while I might not see value in the bow, other people will. Now, there are 2 new units which are in the lore, they exist in the lore, they're just like 1 or 2 sentences. The Oceanids being the first one, which is like monstrous infantry moving around. A lot of people pointed out to be reminiscent of a certain franchise, and yeah, it kind of looks like that. Thank you, Tariff, for brain rotting everyone. Yeah, it's a defensive type of unit. They're not there to do a lot of damage. They're there just to kind of hold the enemy down, and they do that quite well. The Sea Elemental, on the other hand, big, giant Sea Elemental, yeah, I mean, it's exactly what it says it does, right? It's a big monster, does a lot of damage, fairly good overall. My only weird thing is, like, is this supposed to be the Incarnate or anything? Because, like, we do know that Tritons are supposed to be Sea Elementals, but they might also be the Incarnates. We've seen Sea Elementals represented in different ways, where they've got arms, these ones don't. It's a bit of a... What is this supposed to be, and what level of degree is that? Kind of like similar to how dragons are so vastly different, which is why you have star, moon, sun, and then all the separate types and emperor dragon and shit, right? Still, it's a cool monster, and it just needs a little bit of touch-up when it comes to just the animations. It kind of looks like the quality kind of gets lost around the base. Do I call it a shaft? I'm not too sure what to call it anymore. Yeah, that meme's never going to die. So would I recommend the High Elf DLC by itself? And again, I would say yes. Surprisingly, not a lot of issues. The campaign itself felt very, very unique, which ended up being a lot better than I anticipated. When we first got told more or less what this campaign would be, I was like, well, that's not going to be very interesting, is it? If it's just kind of like Nakai. But it turned out it wasn't Nakai, it was something completely different. It's good that the factions are active, and if you confederate the other legendary lords, you'll have another active minor faction. You can't confederate that one, but you can support it, and I think that's pretty good. It's different. The units themselves, very different too. The Merworm is the big standing point there in the Lothan Skycutters. I think those were a lot requested by the community. The Ship's Company isn't too special, not gonna lie, but the main thing here is going after the character, I think. The strong point for the High Elves is the totally unique campaign, and it's good. Again, showcasing that unique and stylized campaigns can be entirely possible. If we go back to Omens, for example, it was you know, and that's something, that's all I could say, The level of quality for the campaigns has been much, much higher. There's not really much to talk about here for the High Elves, mostly because it's a lot of centralized stuff, and that's definitely fine. You can complement something without going to be long-winded on it, you know? It's also important to mention that the reason why there's a lot of hype revolving around these DLCs is because, well, there are a lot of reworks also. Factions are getting touched up. Teclis and Tyrion have finally gotten something to make them unique. We've also got brand new Confederation mechanics for the High Elves. Slaanesh has gotten an update to bring it more in line with every other monogod faction. And of course, NORSCA getting its huge rework with a small mechanic to Wulfric and a large mechanic to Throg. NORSCA identity-wise feels exactly the same way as how it was when they were first introduced. Identity-wise. Gameplay-wise, it's like looking at the original Beastmen compared to the Beastmen now. It feels great, they've got a lot going for them, and everything is just working as intended. Which, by the way, I just want to state, the fact that monster hunts were consistently broken until this patch is really disappointing. They should have been fixed up in an interim patch whilst we were waiting for this, because monster hunts have been down for about a year or two, maybe even more. Now I have a video dedicated to the patch for 7.0, and you can find that there in the channel, but I do need to talk about it here because these patches do form the same part of development cycle as the DLC. So any work that's going on to these patches is stuff that could have potentially been on the DLC, but shouldn't. Because could you imagine getting SAYL and then not having a NORSCA rework? Could you imagine all the updates not being there? So by definition, whilst the patch is not paid for, it's still very much a foundation for the DLC itself. They are supposed to synergize. And if you don't pick up the DLC, all the lords that you have access to for the High Elves, for NORSCA, and for SLAANESH will benefit from these things. It's a very good system, and I ultimately believe that the big patches should be around the DLC cycle. It's good to see them finding the sweet spot. It's something really, really important. Had there not been updates for any of the races, this DLC would have been in a lot worse state. Though, mind you, the SLAANESH stuff would have been fine. It's just NORSCA and High Elves desperately needed a facelift. And it's really important that we get more and more. There are still races and factions in Total War Warhammer which are very much suffering and incredibly boring. Now we do have to talk about the FLC Legendary Lord, the MASQUE, as she's going to be completely for free alongside the patch. And I really am surprised on how well she plays. It's a faction that was introduced in the same way as Epidemius, Arbal, all the rest, and surprisingly she exceeds them in terms of quality. The dance mechanic is really, really cool. The fact that it's not just for her, but for the whole faction. So every army can have different types of dances. It plays incredibly well. I'm not keen on her starting position. It's not great, but there's really a map congestion that is really starting to hurt the game, I think. That will be more noticeable as more and more DLC gets announced. Well, we don't know how many there's left, but considering that they've already started teasing for Nagash, and we can be pretty certain where he's going to start out, yeah, the map congestion is going to start feeling quite interesting. I don't imagine that he's going to be the only Legendary Lord in that upcoming DLC. But back to the MASQUE. A lot of quality has been put in there. She feels like a Legendary Lord from a DLC. Sure, it's not a massive mechanic, but it's more in the line of the mechanics that, well, yeah, let's be honest here. We saw for the paid lords in Omens of Destruction. And that's a good thing. I think that's a really good thing. Well, not for Omens, but definitely for the MASQUE. And naturally, once again, for me, because I'm finally getting the characters that I've been waiting for ages. It feels like they've been delaying this on purpose, just to hit me right where it hurts. Narrative has been kind of low, but that's been an ongoing thing since, what, Shadows of Change, essentially? Narrative has just been disappearing more and more from Total War. And there is a narrative. You're kind of going through it for your quest, which is like, well, Thrones of Decay. Well, that's the only one I can actually think of, because I don't think Omens really had a narrative. It just kind of felt like all over the place. It's good that a small narrative has come to play, and I will say that the cinematics, especially the quest battles, the final quest battles for all three of the Legendary Lords are quite good. Like the SAYL one is really fantastic, even though it's very easy. Well, given the army I had, it's probably why. So it's not fully like Chaos Dwarf level narrative. See it more as Thrones of Decay. I don't think that's too bad. I think the Throne of Decay one, which was more like you're playing through the campaign and the narrative is stuck on your quests. It's a weird thing, because how much is too much narrative and how much is too little, right? I do think that they have improved compared to Omens, and vastly compared to Shadows of Change. Shadows of Change just felt all over the fucking place, I'm not going to lie. So it's always going to have a weird point there for me. I'm always going to have a little bit of contempt for that DLC. There is also an ebook that was released for free. I believe you need the CA account for it, which was written by David Geimer, one of my favorite writers. And every time that he does something for Total War, it's always an absolute joy. The dude knows the Warhammer Fantasy universe incredibly well. Like, you can tell this guy lives and breathes it, and it's great that CA hires him. I have been made aware it's from like a different budget, not the budget from the DLC, by the way. So that's good. That's good. You know, whenever we can get him popping up, hey, I count that as a real big win, and I mean a real big win. Believe me, since the only new lore that we have for like the old world is one novel and it's fucking awful. Like, David, if you're listening to this, please, I beg you, write an old world novel. Back to the narrative in game. If just a little bit more came in, if just a little bit more, I feel like it would be that sweet spot. It's almost there. And that's not a bad thing. I don't think it actually hurts Tides of Torment at all. It's just a little bit more narrative would have been cool. Like, some of the SAYL battles, I'm not sure if that's a bug for our build or something, but they're just not voiced. And it's like, oh, that's weird. Just pan in and that's it. Okay. Now, one question I can't really ask is, was this DLC worth the wait? Because I'm kind of worried, considering that CA have delayed this multiple times. Remember, right? Remember that this SLAANESH DLC, the SLAANESH DLC was planned prior to Omens. It was supposed to be after Thrones of Decay from as per the original roadmap, right? So it's been cooking for a long, long time. God only knows how it was originally, and we know that it's been delayed again because they had that video where it's like, well, it wasn't with our design ethos after we started playing it. It's kind of worrying that it took that long to kind of go like, oh shit, yeah, no, this doesn't work. Now, obviously, we have to take into account that some things were happening internally, like layoffs and whatever else was happening at Creative Assembly that we'll never really hear about, though there are whispers all over the place, apparently. I imagine that since CA Sophia have jumped in, then they had some fresh eyes. That's something that we've seen with Omens of Destruction, that they came in for that, but we don't know how much of Sophia were there. There's just been a lot of delays, and it's just kind of worrying because it's been one DLC a year, and not gonna lie, right? I find it extremely ridiculous. Yes, Creative Assembly are busy with other titles that are going to be announced very soon, but if you've got a title which the fanbase is literally willing to throw money at you, why is it taking so long? Why are resources not being put there? And it does make me worry that Creative Assembly are just kind of falling back into what used to happen with too many titles being worked on and whatever else in the back end. Like, we know there's going to be a historical and another fantasy thing. We don't know what else is going to happen there. Alien Isolation 2 was announced, but again, too many titles can cause problems. It'd be great to see the return of, 3 active Total War titles at a time and constant DLC throughout, but if they can't handle one DLC a year, right? If that's the maximum currently, I'm a little concerned of what's going to happen in the future. Not only that, but the constant delays have been making the fan base, like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, completely apathetic to what was going on. It's good to see people hyped up again, and I think that's really, really good. But I think it's really important to read the room, read what's going on, throw out information much better rather than just like constantly delaying that too, because let's be honest, even the reveals have been kind of like delayed. Like, I'm pretty positive on the DLC, but I don't want to say it was worth the wait. I don't think it's realistic to ask for a DLC a year, right? I think it should be more. And it's not because I want and I'm invested into this game. It's the fact of the matter is they used to shit out a game a year. I think it's very important to talk about the fact that this was prior to COVID, because when they got the massive surge and everything to keep up, that was around COVID period, I believe. That's how a lot of gaming companies ended up, and this is why a lot of gaming companies started doing more and more layoffs, which are still ongoing, by the way. Almost like, the bubble was going to burst eventually, and a lot of gaming companies didn't realize that for some reason. I do want to say that this was worth the wait, but again, it is one of those, it was a year, man. It was a year. And this concept art, like, we knew that the Chimera concept art has existed for a long time, literally before the release of Warhammer 3. They must have these arts planned out. They must have ideas for DLCs planned out. Well, what we talked about it, right? Like, they've done a blog where they've said, like, oh, they're looking at future DLCs and smaller formats. And that's something that I'm hoping kicks up the pace a bit. Because a lot of factions desperately need some content. A lot of races do. And not only that, but, like, yeah, it's DLC a year. And who knows when those other games are going to come out. So do I recommend Tides of Torment as a whole? Yes. It's something that I found myself very much surprised about as I was journeying through the DLC. Keep in mind that this has been consistently delayed, and every time that it has been delayed, it has made me fear more and more for the product. It's something that I just wasn't really expecting to be good. But as soon as I fired up the build, and I started off with DECHALA, and I started moving into other factions, things were looking damn good. This is a DLC which has exceeded expectations. I expected this to be Omens of Destruction 2, or even worse. Maybe even Shadows of Change. But it ended up being a lot better than I expected, and I think that's incredibly important. Creative Assembly are capable of making good DLCs. It's incredibly depressing that it's taken a year, and there are factors that could have come into play there. We won't be privy to the background information, not just like you guys as consumers, but myself as a content creator. We don't really get told as much as some people seem to think for some reason. Now, I know some people are going to ask for ratings, and I don't really like using ratings, but I will happily compare. So, with the Thrones of Decay DLC, I would say that that was more or less in line with around a 9 out of 10. This is after the Deeps mechanic was added in, and I'd say that that is a very, very good number. It's something that a lot of people were asking for. Omens of Destruction fell around 7. Shadows of Change 1 was on 0, where Shadows of Change 2 was closer to a 5-6 region, right? Shadows of Change is definitely better now, but I feel like it's still missing quite a bit. A FLC Legendary Lord is one of them. Now, if nothing goes wrong with the release of this DLC, Tides of Torment should fall firmly on an 8, putting it firmly right below the Thrones of Decay DLC, nudging up to an 8.5 when they fix up the devotees and finally bring in the Pleasure Knights. Hopefully they're called Pain Seekers. I think that would be kind of cool. Now, I'm basing this purely on the content. Never mind the shit shows, never mind the delays. And it's pretty sad that in this age, right, in 10 years into the series of Total War Warhammer, we are still getting shit shows, we are still getting a lot of delays, and there's still problems with patches and so on. I only pray that Creative Assembly have learnt from the previous mistake and will actually be proactive. None of this, oh, this is a Category 1, Category 2 thing. It's actions that speaks louder than words. You can talk all you want and blog post all you want, but people want working products. And I think that's very important to talk about here at the end, because it's something that they don't seem to wrap their head around. People are more than happy to buy DLCs. More than happy to buy DLCs. In fact, you see people begging for them to release more DLCs. But as the community have said time and time again, the cash cow needs to be treated with the respect it deserves if they want it to continue to be a cash cow. Future games are going to be coming. Future games are going to be announced literally tomorrow. The only way that this is going to work for the future is if they learned from this. Not only just for Total War Warhammer, but whatever gets announced tomorrow. Creative Assembly said on a stream, I believe it was Steve on one of the streams with Josh, saying that they want to change around the terminology of the future of Total War, right? Because everyone sees it as a negative thing, which, to be fair, CA kind of asked for that themselves with Free Kingdoms. But, you know, I think they can do that, right? I really, or at least I hope they can. I want to play these games, and I want to play these DLCs, and I want to have fun. Tides of Torment was a lot of fun. Creative Assembly need to prove that, yeah, the future is going to be a good one. And that's not just the reveals tomorrow. It needs to be an ongoing effort from now on, basically. Now, with all that being said, this is a long review. I am very tired. I've had to cover a little bit of everything. I've had to cover the shit shows. I've had to cover a few things because it all falls into this year. And it all falls into Tides of Torment. I am going to set this to render. I am going to go to bed. It's currently 4 a.m. But when the video goes live, yeah, you know, I'll be live on twitch.tv/thegreatbookofgrudges. Pop by, say hi. We can finally talk about it. And I can finally give you all that. And yeah, I'll see you all again very, very soon. Hopefully with good news to share. Bye.